House Bill 1168 has passed unanimously. Who can ever say that? We are now able to have the critical resources in the air and on the ground to get on these fires quickly and to contain them, to help our communities become more resilient, home by home, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, and to help restore the health of our forests so they don't keep going up in flame. You're about to hear stories, people here in Washington State who have been impacted, some of them tragically, by the wildfires we've experienced in the past 5-6 years. You're going to hear how wildfire confronted them and the challenges that it has presented, not just during that fire, but post-fire. The reality is wildfires are impacting every single one of us, and many of our communities and our firefighters, it's impacting even more. But this doesn't have to be our reality. We can do something about it. And it starts with the kinds of investments we will now have through this significant legislation that has passed. Please listen to these stories. These are our firefighters, these are our community members who have put their lives on the line. Their stories are important to make sure these catastrophic wildfires are not the new normal, and to make sure the evergreen state does not turn charcoal black, and that we can save not only our communities, but lives.
And 165 as well, and they should be headed back as well.
I remember that day like it happened this morning. It's that clear of a picture. On August 19th, I remember it was getting really hot. Summer was in full force now. Things were really dry. The temperature was really hot. We got dispatched to the Woods Canyon Road, which was where the Twist River fire started. And as soon as we dispatched, we were on our way. And as we got there, things seemed pretty normal. Fire wasn't completely out of control, and it was just slowly creeping up the hill. There were some structures in danger. As we were doing that initial hike up the road, you know, it's thrilling in a lot of ways. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, especially if you're new to it. But at that point, during the fire, I wasn't too scared of what was going on. It seemed like everything was under control. Of course, there's a lot of smoke in the air, but nothing seemed really out of the ordinary. But when things did start to really get scary is when there started to be some propane tanks that started venting. When the fire is near those tanks venting is extremely loud. I did start getting a little nervous. The intensity of the fire started picking up. This was a real fire, and it seemed like it had the potential to turn into something a lot bigger. We noticed there was a big wind shift. The wind started picking up, the intensity of the wind started picking up, and you could feel that gust come across your face. And at that very moment, the fire was below us at this point, but at that very moment, it seemed like fuel from the clouds, like gasoline was poured onto this fire, because within an instant, it just exploded. The trees were engulfed, and that fire was now coming directly at us. Intense moment of chaos. It went from 0 to 100 within just a couple of seconds. Our crew jumped in our engine, and really at that point, our only chance of getting out of there was to drive back downhill, and that meant driving through the fire. The problem was that there was zero visibility. It wasn't even that there was a lot of smoke, it was just pure flame. The tallest flames I had ever seen in my life at that point. The heat was extremely intense, and it was just pure orange and red wherever you looked, and you could not really see the road at all. And really all you could see is just the red glow of the flame. As we were proceeding down the road, the visibility was so bad, the driver of the engine ended up veering off to the right-hand side of the road, and we went off a steep embankment into a ravine. And that is where our engine came to a really abrupt stop, and we crashed at the bottom of it, and our engine was completely stuck right there, and we were surrounded by the flames because we essentially crashed right into the midst of the fire. So I swung open the door, I was on fire, and my only option was to try to get to our safety zone, which was down below but that meant running through the fire on foot. And the fire was so intense that I knew it was either die right there or at least die trying to run out of that situation. I climbed up the hillside, got to the road, to the gravel road, and just started screaming as loud as I could that there was guys behind me. And I remember looking down at my boots, and they were literally smoking. I was wearing a pair of leather boots and the laces were singed and everything. These guys were putting me in the back of the fire engine, and we were heading down the road to meet up with an ambulance, which was then going to take me to a life flight to get me out of there and get me treatment, because at this point I was burned 65% of my body. I was begging for the medics to pray for me, and after a couple doses of pain medication, everything went black. I went to sleep, and I woke up about a month later in Seattle, Washington at Harborview Medical Center. I woke up to essentially to being a mummy. I was completely wrapped in gauze from head to toe. All I could see was my feet. So I went from a lifestyle of loving the outdoors and working in the outdoors and being outside almost 24/7 to being locked up inside and having nothing but a window to look out.
The day of the Cold Springs fire, the wind was blowing severely that day. I know that it was moving trees rapidly, and so when the fire started, there was no way to contain it. Everybody was in emergency mode trying to preserve or save. Where the fire initially started at, there was a residence right there by the road. And so the members there had to determine to save or try to save their house, or try to run down and warn other people that the fire was moving. By the time that they got the fire crews even coordinated to move out there, the fire had already moved over miles, and it was headed over a mountainous area. The terrain was so remote that there's sporadic housing, and so there was no way for them to pull an emergency team together to go out and warn individuals. And as it rapidly moved and the night came down on it, you could see the fire, but you couldn't identify where there was roads to residence because of the darkness.
When we look back, I started seeing some smoke coming, more than usual, some black smoke, and I thought maybe a building that caught fire, but maybe not the actual mill itself, the other building. And next thing you know, everyone was outside when we got to North 40, and the whole structure was up in flames.
I think that it was just surprising how fast it went. I've lived in the same residence for over 25 years. I've had 4 fires go around my house. I was a victim of the Cold Springs, but we've never not had advance warning because of the speed of the wind that was happening then. I think that when it hit, it started and crossed, over 40 miles in one night over terrain, going zigzagging back and forth into different areas. And then the wind would shift and move in a different direction. So just trying to contain it, let alone trying to warn the residents. If we look at the terrain here, we try to preserve life and limb first, but when we're trying to do that at the same time, we're so sporadic in our housing in the timbered areas that it's really hard to know exactly where the residents are. They're not really clearly marked or defined. They are at the road, but as the roads go up into the mountains, it's harder to catch them. I think every year we deal with climate change. Last year was no exception. Even last week, if you didn't tell from here, there's snow today, but last week there was nothing on the ground. There was no moisture. The rain had melted all our snow away, and so we were looking at a possible another high impact season. With the Cold Springs fire going for days and no power, it was really hard to communicate for our fire crews and the residential people. The power went out the second day to almost all residents, and it was out for weeks. I want to say we burnt over 80 homes between the 2 fires that we had moved through our communities. I lost both ancestral homes of mine, one that was up on Cameron Lake Loop, and then the one down on Highway 97 was my grandmother's. The one on Cameron Lake was my grandfather's grandparents. So we lost both of them. And the impact to all the families that are still trying to recover is just tremendous. But also the outpouring of support in outside communities really helps, but it doesn't put their lives back together. We just seen some elders who lost both their homes. They were siblings, and they're both in their late 70s, and both of them were homeless in one day. You know, so the impacts here were severe, all the way down to the youth. A lot of people struggling. We're in a poverty area. We don't have high employment, and the ones who do, you know, barely scrape by just to live on what they have. And if it was paid for, you know, they could afford, you know, their utilities and stuff. So these fires are just devastating.
Behind me is our old Fish and Wildlife building. This fire was burned last year during the last fire season, was called the Greenhouse Fire, and it actually started up towards the Columbia, burned its way up and over the hill. You can't see right now, but over the hill, and burned this direction, and then caught these facilities on fire. It used to be our old forestry building where my dad worked, and then I worked. And behind it is a recycling center that also burned. Just to get an idea, this is where we used to park right out in the front of the building. Now it's no longer here.
This last fire season mainly came up out of grassland areas and covered vast amount of land in a short amount of time. The 2015 and 2017 fires all came across through residential areas and went into timbered areas and just took out our forests. I mean, it devastated our natural resources. I don't know how many decades it will take to recover. And this one here, it went through so many different areas. It took out a lot of wildlife, and that's one thing that nobody talks about is, you know, the land that was scarred and burned and the residents that were lost. But when you drive through, we live in cattlemen's country and farm area and wildlife area. When they were going through perusing the areas after the burn, they found so many skeletal remains, burned animals, injured animals. It was heart-sickening, you know, to witness that and the livelihoods that it impacted.
As far as from a fishery standpoint, you start getting the water quality issues, and that's a big thing with fires and erosion. You know, there's no roots or vegetation to hold anything back when you get the spring rains or the snow melt from the spring. That washes out a lot of roads, culverts, sediment transport into the bigger water bodies. So it's not only an issue with the soil, but where that soil goes after. On extreme fires like the Cold Springs in particular, with how hot it burned and some of the soil that, conditions afterwards, it's going to take a long time to get it back to a more natural state. Historically, fires burned, or lightning strike happened and they let them burn, and that kept a lot of the fuels down naturally, and you had more park-like forest ecosystems where, they talk about a lot of our historical records of people being able to ride horse all the way through the woods everywhere. When I was a kid, a big fire was 5,000 acres. Now these mega fires are over 200,000, 300,000 acres just burned in one fire, and so they've definitely changed. Something's changed. I know, like, just speaking for myself, and I'm only 33, but I've seen the change. There's a lot of concerns with the future in wildfire here on the Colville Reservation. It seems like in the past 10 years or so, the fires have got a lot more extreme behavior. I think since 2015, we've lost over 500,000 acres just here on the reservation alone. And a lot of those are due to human-caused fires, 90% of them. You get your occasional lightning strike that, but typically it seems most are human-caused, whether that's people actually lighting them off or, power lines or some infrastructure, human infrastructure. With climate change, I think that's just increased the number of fires we're getting and the behavior of them. It seems like we're getting a lot more less snow in the winter, which is, increasing how dry it is, and when it comes summertime, and you still get a lot of those fuels built up from your spring rains and stuff, and then it just seems like the more fuels are out there and the longer fire seasons we have, that their fires are burning longer and hotter. And I think one of the big successes is all the interagency work that's been done with the DNR, and working as one. I mean, the fires affect all of us, whether it's on tribal or fee ground, so working together so we can stop them and get a better handle on them, I should say.
And all of a sudden it just went whoosh and flames, and I had to did I just see that? Is that what I'm looking at? And I did. I went, that tree just got on fire.
I can't remember, it was like 1 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning. I got a call from our duty sergeant that we had a fire in the city that had started likely from the wind that knocked a tree onto a transformer, but it had ignited a large area and was immediately threatening homes.
Took a walk down to where the newer development is, just down the block, and we started seeing helicopters coming down in that river there and picking up loads of water, and you could see the smoke on the other hill over in Sumner. I saw a tree go up in flames, which is along a road I take all the time down below, and I just was really surprised, and then I saw the helicopter dump the water on it.
Immediately became apparent that this was a pretty big deal for us. The fire was growing, the winds were still moving pretty good, and the fire was rapidly approaching a lot of houses.
It was getting pretty weird then, but we still had no idea till later in the afternoon how bad it was to affect us.
Evacuations were going to be in play, which I've never been involved in evacuation of that many people. I worked for the city of Puyallup before, and we had some flooding issues, and so we've had evacuations there, but I've never had anything on this scale. So we kind of didn't know what to expect. We were helping with evacuations. The other thing is a lot of the roads were littered with debris. So it impeded the first responders getting to the area.
Police and fire came to the neighborhood and suggested us to, I better get out.
I was coming back and I saw these people kind of rushing towards that area, and they all looked concerned. I turned around and I instantly saw this humongous cloud of smoke. I mean, it was dark and scary, and it looked like it was just down on that block, and I went, oh crap, and I ran in here and I said, Paul, it started again.
It was kind of figuring it out as we go. Usually it's a joint operation that we do with the fire department. On a structure fire, we pretty much know we got to control traffic, got to keep people away, got to keep people from driving over the hose, make sure fire has a good ingress and egress. But on this one, I mean, we didn't know what to expect. We've seen a lot of house structure fires where we assist fire department, but never been involved in a wildland fire to this magnitude. Almost every summer, somebody throws a cigarette butt out and the side of the hill burns on 410. And the fire folks are there pretty quickly and they get it extinguished, but I've never seen or been involved in anything of this magnitude.
Very smoky. Yeah, you couldn't even see the valley. It was all basically, smoke. Windy and smoky, and it could have been, we thought maybe it was from the fires from California or from Eastern Washington, or we didn't realize that a lot of it was probably from here.
No.
The sky was orange, the smoke was thick. You could actually hear the crackling of the fire. It was, gave you the scope and size of it was beyond anything you could even imagine.
At about 7 p.m., I was talking to our emergency management personnel and saying, at what point do we start kind of mobilizing every contractor water truck that exists in Pierce County, get them filled up and get them out here trying to do something to help, because our fire assets were tapped.
And with the winds blowing the way they were, and you just didn't know what was going to happen. It was a very uncertain time, and just kind of very uneasy for somebody that's never been involved, especially with fire, to see what it was going to do or what was going to happen. Could have very easily, if it would have jumped Myers Road, it's got nothing but fuel to the lake. There's houses and trees, and it was very dry. Obviously that time of year it was a red flag warning, and obviously we found out firsthand what exactly that means. We've never experienced something like that, and all the conditions were just ripe for it.
It was
scary, yeah.
I stood in the middle of the living room and said, what do you take? I mean, besides Paul had gotten the important papers, I just grabbed pictures.
Yeah.
And it's like, really, this is stuff. But that was really horrible to think that everything could be gone.
One of our officers was told to evacuate his house, and that we were told in the EOC that those houses where he lives probably are not going to make it through the night. And fortunately they did survive, but it was touch and go for quite a while.
See where the fire worked down almost in between some of the homes. And it was just literally that day, Assistant Chief Stabenfeld during, while commanding was, I need more engines. I need more, and every time he thought, I'm going to lose that house, another engine showed up, and he could park it at that house.
It was getting pretty close, it seemed. If the winds would have picked up, who knows what would have happened.
Right, and then when we did come back and see the damage so close, it was obvious it was coming our way.
Yeah.
It was only like a mile or so away.
I think planning for the next one, unfortunately, is what we're going to have to do. Is we've already talked to the fire department about better communications to make sure that we have that in place from the get-go, and to have alternatives, because we had no power, no cell phone. The HVAC here in the building where our EOC wasn't working, so it was and it was in the 90s those days, so you can imagine it was sweltering, plus the smoke. Couldn't really get any airflow because you couldn't have the smoke come in. So just making sure that our officers are prepared, having some kind of a go bag with meals and things like that in case they're going to be deployed for a while. Understanding what we need to do to support fire in these situations, and a lot of it was making sure that they were safe, that they didn't have to worry about traffic, so shutting down roads, make sure people didn't drive over their water lines.
This is relatively new in our area. We've seen smaller ones. We've had, like a 5 or 10 acre fire on somebody's, farm, where they would lose, a few barns and things like that. But we were always able to contain it, like at the property line. This is the first one we've seen of this size where there was no stopping it for a couple of days. It was going to go where it wanted to go because of being wind driven.
It was bizarre. Like, I don't have experience with fire. We live in the wet side.
Yeah, I never thought this would happen in
No.
Western Washington ever.
No.
I mean, this is
I was
crazy.
worried about my sister and her husband in Cle Elum, and they ended up being the safe ones.
Yeah.
If this is going to be the new reality, we need to have adequate resources. If we're going to, instead of rebuilding our communities every year, we need to prepare to make sure that we're saving those communities, and having the adequate resources, I think, would go a long way towards that. People need to understand that this is the new reality. It used to be an east side thing, but obviously it's not anymore, and how much it can impact a community. And we were so lucky again that if the fire would have shifted a little bit, the devastation could have been a lot worse.
Today under the tents was the Christmas in Novia, where they did a fundraiser and they were able to get donors to adopt all these families. 44 families altogether. A lot of the donators actually went shopping on their own. They wrapped it. They had a great time shopping, because they were able to have a list of what the people liked. They were able to actually, personally shop for people.
Some blankets to stay warm in our trailer, and some socks and stuffed animals, and we're still in a RV at the moment that's paid for by Catholic Charities. The first week coming back here, it was really hard. It was my grandparents' house. My grandpa was planning on giving us this house after they passed away. It was the porch right here, the sunroom porch, and then it was a couple more steps, and then that was the front door into the house. Then that whole area right there was my husband and my bedroom. That's just where Amber grew up, honestly. She's lived here since she was born. Her room was, like I said, over in that corner, so it was really traumatizing for her. She knows right when we come into Malden, she knows the town Malden. She's like, oh, we're in Malden, and she knows where our house is, and she just kind of squirms and freaks out a little bit and says, I don't want to see the burnt house.
It was really blue sky, and there was just a dark black line of smoke right towards our house, and the fire literally ripped right through here in a line right to our house. Super smoky, and within 5 minutes the cops were telling us to get out of the house, so it was super hard to get anything to think to get what you need out of your house. And then within 5 more minutes it was so smoky in the house that you had to leave no matter what. And then within about 30 minutes we got a call saying that the house was completely gone, and there was a pixely video of just the smokestack.
We were leaving expecting we were just leaving for smoke evacuations. There's one area that we're digging in a bunch right here, because the night before, I took off all my wedding rings, just all my rings in general, and put them on a little tiny ceramic plate.
Petrified wood. It's millions of years old, but there was still wood to burn in the middle. And my neighbor gave it to me right before he passed away. His ashes were actually sitting on his table, so he wanted to be spread throughout Malden.
I think this was a really amazing opportunity for a little bit of stress off of parents, and it wasn't only for families. So even single households or couples, they get to open some presents. And that I think was the goal, was for everybody to realize, like, hey, there's a lot of people out here that care for you and they really just want to help.
With physical injuries, as far as my burns went, as far as the pain in my bones and skin went, a lot of times you can cover that up with different pain medications that are out there. But the mental trauma, that is so hard to overcome. And even after your physical injuries heal to a certain degree, those painful memories, they never ever leave you. I'll have those with me till the day that I die. I lost 3 buddies that day. Other firefighters were injured. Not only did my life change, but the lives of everybody around me, the lives of the people around me changed. When I look back and I think about what we could have done better that day, I think the first and foremost thing was training. But when it comes to the training of the individuals that you're sending out in harm's way, you cannot cut corners at all, or else disaster strikes. I was only on a handful of fires before the Twist River fire. That was my first year working as a wildland firefighter. I truly feel like my law enforcement training is what saved me that day. I'll tell fire crews that, and you can always kind of see their faces in shock, like, how does that even apply? Not so much technique of how to use a Pulaski or how to apply water to a fire. Of course, all that's important, but really what's even sometimes potentially more important is how you're going to respond mentally to that situation. It's hard to say if, what could have changed the outcome of that day, but I do think if there was training put in place, that maybe the outcome would have been different. Every wildfire season seems to seemingly grow in intensity, and these fires are burning hotter and they're growing more rapidly, and there just seems to be more of them. Really what it comes down to is not only better training for our firefighters, but better resources, and that comes down to funding. At the end of the day, we need as much resources as possible to be able to fight these fires. When you think about wildfire, of course, there's a huge upfront cost, but the cost down the road can potentially be even far higher. There could be lives lost, there could be home loss. All of a sudden, there's a lot of rehab work that has to be done. Having that funding up front is almost like an insurance policy in a lot of ways, that it can ensure that there isn't going to be even more disaster down the road. Sadly, it's extremely expensive to fight these things, but by paying for those costs up front can potentially save a lot more money down the road. Going forward, I want to see everything from our rookies up to our senior firefighters be able to receive top-notch training. I think about the guys that are out there on the line. All I can really do at this point, being that I can't fight fire anymore, is pray that their training is up to par and that they're comfortable doing what they're doing, and praying for their safety. I always knew that, or at least I always felt, that Western Washington was a place where I could come to escape fire season, because it's typically damp, and you really aren't going to see the fires here. But as we saw this year and in the couple years leading up to this year, Western Washington has changed. We now see a lot of fire here, and this season it was hard on me. The smoke brings back a lot of memories. Seeing the flames at night out my window, the eerie glow off in the distance, that stuff is really, really hard. It brings back a lot of hard memories. having the proper funding in place is going to make sure that we can have all those resource orders that we need. When firefighters are calling in for a bucket drop or a retardant drop, we need to, or they need to know that that resource is actually going to be provided to them, because it can mean the difference of a home burning down and not, or it can also mean the difference of a crew being overtaken by a wildfire or not. Those resources are a must.
I'm Andy Ashrenbrenner. I'm the Hood Canal District Manager out of South Puget Sound region, managing state lands. And on the fire side of things, I'm a Type 3 incident commander. There's a lot of very specific things with fire training. We seem to focus on things that kind of give us the biggest bang for our buck, which I totally understand because of budgets. However, I think that there's some very minute specific things that we can get into with our fire training. The biggest thing that I see is with the younger firefighters and fire behavior, recognition for extreme fire behavior, but then also with that, getting them exposure. So some of the things that I would like to see is, I guess, job shadowing. So when those are those key opportunities when you have younger people with fire, people who are really trying to get that experience, to get them to start developing their own sets of slides and seeing things, but then having a coach, mentor, somebody there who can explain things. Fire behavior is that study of trying to make fire predictable, or more predictable than it is. You know, fire is dynamic, and you know it's difficult to predict. And so when you take all of your external factors, you got the, you know, your weather, you got topography and your fuels, and you start putting all these things together. So in training, it's learning how all those things interact together to create a fire behavior. You know, our fire season is seasonal, especially on the west side. So you have all this downtime to kind of, I guess, I wouldn't say lose the skill, but you kind of get a little rusty. The ability to make those split-second decisions comes with practice. And it also comes from, you know, practicing in the classroom, not just practicing, you know, when you're out on a fire and living that all the time, but then also, you know, more time in the classroom. If firefighters don't get the training they need, there's always that what if, you know, that worst case scenario, you know, that there's a burnover or there's something catastrophic that can happen.
Out here on the edge of the Norse Peak fire, which burned in 2017. You can see the burn trees in the foreground. At the time, it was the largest West Side fire that had occurred in many decades, actually. So it was kind of a rare opportunity for us as researchers to go out there and ask some questions that have just remained unknowns just because fire is so rare on the west side.
Fires, the big fires that tend to shape western Washington, tend to be infrequent, meaning that it could span centuries between these big events, but they tend to be intense, meaning you end up with large patches of stand replacing fire. And the way these forests burn, because they experience fire so infrequently, is very different than the way, say, the dry forests in eastern Washington would naturally burn, where those fires would be burning with lower intensity, thinning out the small trees, leaving the big ones.
All evidence we have is that the west side fire regime is just a totally different animal, and that the narratives we typically carry for the east side, where fire suppression has caused a fuel buildup, climate change has dried out forests a lot, and those have combined to create this kind of perfect storm of increasing fire hazard and fire activity every year. On the west side, the story is really different, and in some ways it's more complex, but in some ways it's simpler. because we know that for millennia the forests on the west side have been burning in giant severe fires in the hundreds of thousands of acres, if not more, as far back as the records go. The tree rings tell us that. Not necessarily a symptom of fuel buildup because of forest mismanagement, because fires burned like this in the past, so before forests were being managed by Euro-Americans. And also these forests are some of naturally the most dense forests on the planet. They're always fuel rich and can always carry fire. And second, the climate change factor, it is very clear in the dry forests on the east side that climate change is driving a lot of fire activity. On the west side, it's less clear because, again, these fires occurred in the distant past, long before human-caused climate change. And the recipe for west side fires is a little more nuanced. We have to have a certain combination of conditions coincide. We have to have a late summer drought, we have to have an ignition source, and we have to have usually a major synoptic east wind event, which is what happened in 2020, especially in Oregon.
For those smaller events, there's the FireWise community principles of hardening the infrastructure around your house. DNR has a great group of people that can really help homeowners assess their houses to try to figure out what to do. You know, some common strategies include cleaning your gutters, making sure maybe changing the material of your roof from shingles to something composite or metal. But one of the most important things to do, like for any of these big natural disturbances, is thinking about your escape routes, how you can get away when a fire occurs. And that's probably as important, if not as anything else that we can think of for a lot of the west side. And probably it also means working closely with emergency responders, right, to kind of get this on their radars if it doesn't already exist. And it's probably not too different than maybe other disasters they think about, right? Because they're already planning for floods and tsunamis, volcanoes, you can go down the list. It's just kind of adding this to the mindset and probably pulling tactics that they're already considering for those other disturbances, but thinking about it in a fire context.
One of the implications of the west side fire regime being so different and west side forest being so different is that the toolkit we have to manage fire hazard in drier forests on the east side, it has more limitations on the west side. It has a role in some places, like the Puget Lowlands and other drier parts of the west side, but by and large, in huge swaths of the Western Cascades, thinning to mitigate fire hazard probably would be ineffective, or we couldn't thin it enough or fast enough. Like we've been saying, the forests over here are just so naturally dense and fuel rich, and they're so productive that, you know, on the east side where we can barely keep up with fuel treatments as it is, right, and those are slow growing forests. So you take that to the west side, and not only would it be hard to initiate that sort of thing, but then to keep up with a treatment need over time within these forests that grow biomass and fuel so quickly would be virtually impossible. In order to reduce fuels enough to actually influence fire spread on the west side, we would probably have to reduce the standing biomass and stem density to a point that the forest would be unrecognizable as anything we know from the west side. It would transform them into something sort of artificial. Humans are influencing fires on the west side of the mountains, but not in the same ways as we are on the east side. The major impact we're having on the west side is just ignitions. There's just ignitions everywhere on the west side now just because of human use, you know, campfires and sparks from cars, cigarette butts, whatever it is. And in fact, I believe it's over 90% of west side fires are human ignited. So in some ways, that's the major management issue we need to deal with in terms of mitigating the risk of west side fires, is getting a handle on the ignition problem.
My name is Bruce Stuntbeck. I live at the North Fork at Tandem Forest, and we chose to live out here in the forest because we love nature. We love the fresh air. We love the ability that we can take nature walks, and most importantly, we've come to realize that we have an individual responsibility, my wife and I, to take care of what we purchased here. So many people think of the forest as a seasonal thing, but what they don't realize is that it changes minute by minute, and everything you see is either a life or a death in the forest, but it is really quite miraculous. Cindy and I got bit by the bug to clean our forest up 7 years ago when we were invited through the mail, through the Department of Natural Resources, to Ronald, Washington. And we went there for a presentation that day, and they had many vendors there to show you what tools to be safe, to go ahead and do the cost share program. And they also had lots of programs that the Department of Natural Resource and the state provide to the residential forest owner. And in the spring of 2016, I had my forest advisor come out here, and we spent most of the day going through the forest and what my responsibilities were, signed a contract, and I've been doing it for 5 years ever since. I do it year round whenever it is permitted to be out in the woods to do my work. There's several steps that you have to do to start your process with a cost sharing program. And the first thing you do that I do is I go out and I actually plot out the area that we made a contract on with my forest advisor. So I will go through that plot. I will literally individually look at each tree, the health of the tree, whether it's within my perimeter. Then I go and I tag all the trees that will remain. So this way, when I go in with my chainsaw, I can fluently go through the plot and start knocking down the trees. Once I get a section of trees knocked down, I utilize my tractor or I utilize my bulldozer to pull the trees out and to limb them. And depending on the season, those limbs will be chipped up with the chipper. The nice thing about chipping is that it really covers the ground. It keeps invasive weeds from coming up. But the nice thing is, as you're putting limbs in that chipper, you have pine cones. And in those pine cones are tiny little seeds. And that actually starts, you can go back 2 years in an area that you've laid your chips out, and you'll see new trees coming up. So you're promoting growth right there. If it's in the winter time, then I burn the slash with controlled fires. We keep them in small piles so nothing gets away, so the flames don't get too high. And then we just individually burn these fires after we receive enough snow. And I truly enjoy it, and I'm learning so much, not just from my forest advisor, but I was also allowed to have a biologist come out here. And I learned from his perspective on the animals, the insects, everything that lives in the forest. We're able to go out and really make our area a park-like, and also feel more comfortable when fire season does come. Because fire season is you get very, very scared. And you just get the EBGBs every day when the temperature is so high. So doing this program, cleaning out the sagebrush, learning that the ladder fuel fire is detrimental to keeping it clean. We enjoy what we're doing, and we will continue to do this, and we want to promote it to our not only our families but also our neighbors. And we look forward to working with the partnership with the DNR constantly.
This is a shaded field break we did in, I believe it was 2017. We identified that this would be a good place for a field break, being that you may be able to hear Interstate 90 in the background. It's just over this hill. Just to the east of here is Ellensburg, Thorpe, and Clay Elm is just to the northwest of where we're standing here. The interstate is a common place for fires to get started. You have a lot of opportunity for human error. cigarettes, car crashes, those are common ways to get fires going. But the objective with a fuel break is we generally are putting them where we have a very well-traveled road. So we have really good access to the area. And then we come in, we've pruned the trees up about 20 feet off the ground. We've reduced the heavier fuels on the ground. That creates a couple things for us. If there was a fire to start along the interstate and it was coming towards this area, the fire would naturally be less intense at this road. So we could have the option of just having engines along the road to put the fire out. Or if it was a wind-driven fire and we were worried about spot fires going over the road, the fuel's already treated where we could do a backfire here and have pretty good confidence in our success burning from the road back towards the fire, which would also stop the fire spread. The reason we don't take all the trees and everything out is, these green trees behind me they're going to burn a lot slower than dead and down material. And with them being pruned up, the likelihood of the crowns catching fire is very low. We do want to continue to grow trees along these roads, so we just prune them up. They'll make it through a fire as long as we can put that fire out quickly. And also, the shade provided doesn't let the ground fuel dry out so much that it causes it to be more flammable or explosive. One of the benefits of doing shaded fuel breaks and planning ahead for future potential fires is you can take advantage of downtimes for the crews that would work on this type of project, which reduces costs significantly from if you're paying to do the same work while you have smoke in the air and a fire actually burning. I think a lot of homeowners may not even realize the benefits here, but if I put on my wildland firefighter hat, what I would see is oftentimes when we're in the heat of summer, having enough resources to protect each and every home that's in the wildland urban interface, that can be a question mark when there's fires burning all over the West. What I can do to stop fire spread along this shaded fuel break with 2 engines could save 20 homes, whereas if the fire was to freely burn through this area and get to those homes, I would need 20 engines at least to protect those same 20 homes. And I think that's where, by putting these fuel breaks in the forest, we can fight more fire with less resources and keep the fire from getting to that wildland urban interface where people's homes are at. These fuel breaks are important because as fires are, as we saw last summer, fires are getting bigger and spreading faster, and the forest is more explosive. So we need to adapt to that and have pre-designated places to stop fire spread out on the landscape that's ready to go, prepared, so our initial attack can be more effective. If we can catch fires in the initial attack, it keeps people safer, it reduces that fire footprint, and it frees up resources to respond to the next fire that could start 2 days from when you're fighting the fire you're at.
Carlton Complex in 2014 here in Pateros. It hit Pateros. We lost over 150 homes in the school district. We had 2 to 4 students in every single class, K through 12, that lost their homes, and a fifth of our staff of teachers here at the school. It hit this area so hard. I had a very different vision of how these disasters got dealt with. I did not realize what the load is on the local pieces, the local people. It really is their recovery and their plan and their execution of that plan. I think in 2014, because we had not seen this kind of fire in Washington State. I mean, it had been a while since we'd seen a really, really huge that with that kind of damage. And now it's becoming common. It is the norm. We've gone half of the 6 years with this kind of damages. And we cannot continue. It is not the same. We are a different season. For us as volunteer firefighters, we don't know when a call is going to come out where it's going to be extreme fire danger in wildland throughout the year. I mean, we had fires that started, I think we even had one in January, but they start in March and they end in November. I mean, we used to think, okay, we got till halfway through June and then we can go through September. We're good. We're not, that is not the reality of it anymore. And we have to look at something totally different. We have to fund it totally different. We have to staff it different. We can make a difference here, but it's going to take a massive effort to do so. It requires every single person on a personal level making an action plan for their home. And people need to see and understand what these fires look like, because they are not the same. They are not a defendable fire in some of these cases. You know, when you get into that piece where you say, this is a once in a lifetime fire, this is, you know, I'm not going to see that again in my lifetime. And then we go the next year, and then we go to 2020 and we see it again. And that's 3 out of 6 years. And you throw in COVID, we've been in disaster recovery for the entire 6 years. Recovery takes time. And we were just finishing our last rebuild house on the reservation from 2015. And those volunteers had to go through smoke Labor Day weekend of this fire to get out of here. The first couple nights, I drove at 1:30 in the morning, drove through Pateras Parks and Brewster Parks, and there was nearly 400 cars, people staying in their cars. We cannot be spending all of our time recovering. We have to be proactive and make something happen on the forefront. This is a system where when you lose everything, it is so difficult to come back from. I got to visit Malden and see that community and those folks in some town meetings at the early stages, and they are strong enough to do this. They're gonna make this happen. There may be some logistical differences, but in the end, it really is the same trauma, the same situation, and the same ending. And so you have winners. You have winning where families are put back together, where people are starting to rebuild homes and get excited about them. At the same time, on the flip side, I understand that it's never going to be their same house. They never will feel the same. Everything will be based on before the fire and after the fire. I have all the hope and all the belief that Malden is going to do so well in this recovery. But it still hurts, it's still pain, and you can celebrate those wins, but there's still the hard work around it. We've had huge successes, and if we can prevent any families in the future from having this kind of stress and pain, it would be so worth it. We've got to do it different, because we need that. We've seen huge changes in the discussion around wildfire, in the allocation of funds, in the programming of resiliency and the programming of fire changes. Those have to continue. We cannot think that we've thrown something at it and we're good. We cannot think of it as a moment in time and an expenditure of effort in time. This is our new norm, our new life. And frankly, that first visit I had over at Olympia, and I was walking across campus there by the Capitol building, and somebody, an aide, yelled over to another aide and said, "Are we pro-wildfire today or anti-wildfire today?" It was the most offensive comment that I had heard. And I literally went into tears and I said, these people have never seen what's happening over here. Representatives from the other side of the mountains need to come over here and see it for themselves. They need to come see what truly is happening here, because it's going to happen over there. We need to find multiple ways to do it. It is not going to be just cleaning forest floors or just throwing more money at firefighters or just pilot programs with fire adapted communities or recovery plans that help with mitigation. It's going to take all of it. All of it. And we have to make a commitment here, or we're going to have communities, we're going to continue to be paying out on communities that then can't support themselves and can't recover, because we're going to be so saturated that we are not going to be able to handle the load. And if we're going to continue the trends of the last 6 years, it's appalling to me that people can't see it. They can't see it. And part of the reason they can't see it is because they haven't come over here and driven it and applied it to them. We are so good at saying, it's not going to happen to me. Well, we can't keep saying that. We have to do it now. People don't see the urgency. And it's urgent.
In the early days of my recovery, my job was simply to recover. I spent hours, literally thousands of hours in therapy. One of my therapists said, "Daniel, what are you doing all this therapy for?" And I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't really know why I was doing it. I guess I was just doing it to get better, but I didn't have any goals set for myself at that point. Something that I always wanted to do was climb Mount Rainier ever since I was a little kid. The Twist River fire, I felt like, was so hard because I felt like Mother Nature had taken so much from me and my buddies and the families, and I felt like being able to conquer Mother Nature would be a way of me showing life that nothing would stop me. And I felt like climbing Mount Rainier would be a way in my mind that I could conquer Mother Nature. I started training to summit Mount Rainier, and I wanted to summit on the memorial of the Twist River fire in honor of my brothers, just to be able to hopefully motivate others as well, that no matter what you go through in life, if you set your mind to something, you can do it. Even though I didn't end up summiting on the memorial of the Twist River fire, I summited the day after. Once I was at the top, I thanked God, I thanked my family for getting me there, my brothers getting me there, and it was an incredible feeling. It was painful in a lot of ways, physically. It was physically challenging. It was mentally challenging, but it was also the best hardship that I had gone through in a lot of ways. I truly felt my brothers was with me that entire climb up that mountain. At over 13,000 feet, that was, I felt like, the closest I've physically been to them since the day of that accident. I believe that they were in heaven looking down on me, and standing on that mountaintop, I got to feel like I was right there with them.